I will just make one remark about the previous panel. Attorney Miri Frankel-Shaw had talked about the intervention of the legislative authority in the work of the compensation fund. I think that in the case of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee that has seemingly prevented the army from receiving the authority for the emergency situations in the home front, and actually expanding with 48 hours every time the emergency situation. The goal was that we, the compensation fund, will eventually regulate, enact regulations that regulate the compensation policies. And I don't think that is right, because that creates a situation when the war is not yet over, but we are forced, because of such pressure upon us and the army to generate regulation. A situation was created that the state is obligated to compensate in a way that I don't think is possible in other cases. If we will have a war that encompasses of Tel Aviv area. Okay, good evening. I'm the manager of the compensation fund in the tax authority. Things were more theoretical than I'm used to. I will talk more about the practice. I'll try to talk about ourselves, what we do, and how we try via our quick rehabilitation and damages inspection to provide the home front and civilians with the empowerment, also economic empowerment. Just an example, a building in Rishon that was damaged in Operation Protective Edge, and part of our goal is to empower the civilians, to let them feel that the sovereign is in the field. And the same day that the building was damaged, we evacuated all its residents to our hotels. We shut down the building. We let everybody stay in the hotel for a number of month. Then we went into a rehabilitation stage, a quick rehabilitation stage, and actually, normally, all the emergency forces are in the field for the first 48 hours. And then later, civilians are left with the presence only of the compensation fund and the tax authority. And it's our duty to empower the citizens during that time in order to make sure that we have a strong home front. We'll cut a bit of the presentation short. We are in the compensation fund. See two goals as our mission. One is the economic aspect. The faster we rehabilitate the market or private houses, the faster we rehabilitate businesses or civilians' lives, the stronger home front we will have. And the psychological aspect, although it's not our job, but we serve, half of our job is to serve as psychologists. The faster we come to the place of damage, the citizens is more calm, that he gets a response immediately. And also we see it in the national aspect. Sometimes public institutions are damaged. We like to rehabilitate these immediately, even a day after, so that the media will come and see and show the public how quickly we get back on our feet. And we see our work as economic and psychological. In almost anything we do, these two aspects are emphasized.
עשינו קצת שינוי. הערכות רשות המיסים לחירום. אני אסביר איך עבדנו בעבר.
I'll explain how we have worked
המלחמה תפסה את רשות המיסים, את קרן הפיצויים, מכנסיים למטה.
The Lebanese war took us by surprise. We were not prepared to quickly respond to the needs of civilians. So following conclusions and recommendations, we took steps to be ready and prepared for the next operation. So, since I have been the manager of the fund, I try to imagine ourselves like an army to be ready for emergency situations. So even in times of routine, we take care of incidents, rock throwing and various incidents. But in emergency time, we grow from a 15-20 personal staff. We grow to a 1,000, 2,000 personal staff. In emergency situation, we open additional offices, while normally we have only 5 offices across the country. So we just want to be prepared to various possible incidents. We want to allow the tax authority to do his work as quickly as possible. We want to open our offices for the public as quickly as possible in times of emergency. In the Lebanese war, we were sitting in unsheltered places. Now we have underground sheltered offices that are all connected through a communication network. We've been putting a lot of money into that so that in times of emergency, from Kiryat Shmona to Eilat, at times of war, and doesn't matter where, and it doesn't matter if the whole country is in war, we can open our offices quickly. We equipped our offices with highly advanced computerized networks. We instituted procedures and evaluation procedures to verify that we do implement our procedures properly. Now, since the Lebanese war, we are we have trained 600 workers who are who normally work in various tax authorities. We have trained them to work with us at times of emergency. And our purpose is eventually to reach the civilians as quickly as possible in order to fulfill our economic and psychological goals. If we do our work properly, I think we can bring back the market and the home front to routine. The property tax law deals with territorial damages. It doesn't matter if you're Australian, civilian, Britain, or Israeli. If you were damaged from a terrorist attack, you're entitled to compensation. At times of war, the first time that Israel decided to provide indirect compensations, if you remember the Gulf War 91, we didn't recognize any indirect compensations. Businesses that shut down for the whole of the Gulf War were not compensated. In the Lebanese war, it was the first time when we gave indirect compensations in the north from Kiryat Shmona and also till Haifa. And then in Oferet Yetzuka and Operation Protective Edge and other incidents, our goal was to compensate people who suffered damages during these operations. When the security forces asked the government to announce an emergency situation, it only does that from security considerations. And I don't think it's logical that the government's approval is subject to the Minister of Economics approval. Yeah, we can compensate civilians for that. Now, next time, the state may not have the finances to compensate for indirect damages. So the decision to announce an emergency situation should not be subject to economic considerations. Since then, we have been enacting regulations, and I will touch a little bit about the regulations that were enacted following the Operation Protected Edge and also during the fighting itself. These regulations in some cases we base ourselves on instructions of the Home Front commandment. For instance, if they instruct not to open the schools or businesses, then we define these places as suffering from indirect damages. I'm sorry for speaking fast and not having, because we don't have time. We have tailored a number of channels, compensation channels, whose goal is to bring the South back as quickly as possible to the routine. So now we have a Supreme Court case with the city of Rehovot that's not inside the limits of the emergency situation that was announced. So they are definitely right on the border between where the line has passed, and they have appealed to the court. So in some cases, the court decides that we should stop. We should have some economic borders, so it rejected their appeal. In the Lebanese war, the main compensation, what I see as our main job is their direct compensation, although financial-wise it's much less significant. This is our procedure to handle incidents, and we always think of quick rehabilitation. When we get applications and claims in our offices following the Lebanese war and the conclusions that we took from it. When we have an incident, we don't wait for a claim to be submitted. We go down to the field immediately when the incidents occur. And in the last operation, ministers laughed at us that in the Lebanese war, it took us a week to come. In Oferet Tzukah, it took us half an hour. And now in Operation Protective Edge, we come even before the rocket falls. So we try to come to the field before the civilian calls us. When they're in shock in the house, we get to his place, we calm him down, talk to him, and try to provide him with a feeling that the state is there for them and the tax authority is there for them. I'll tell you about once I was responsible for the area of Sderot. Sderot was not sheltered once. Today, every house has a shelter. I came 10 minutes after the rocket attack. This is where the rocket hit. This is from inside. And this family, you always looked for the most sheltered place. This room has only one one external wall. It was 8 in the morning. The child told the mom, "Mom, let's sit in the living room." And then the rocket fell exactly on the place where they always, the most secure place in the house. How do you deal with such anxiety of a family? I was once with a family on Thursday evening. We evacuated them to the hotel on Thursday. We came the next day with an engineer. The engineer didn't come yet. Then there was an alarm. We went into the sheltered room. It was a couple, 50 years old. The mother was crying hysterically. The 13-year-old peed in his pants. And then the dad faced the wall. And then you, as a tax authority person, have to calm everybody down. So that's the situation at times of war, and we try to train our people how to deal with such situation. And this is a picture from Oferet Yetzuka. There was the penthouse in the building was held. Walls began falling down. What can we do? Can we touch the property? Can we not touch the property? So then the home front command came and took over the building. That was the first stage. And the second stage, then we had disputes with the penthouse owner. And in the meanwhile, what happened is that the building's walls began to fall. And then she did all kinds of illegal stuff in the house. So then we got a court order to get into the house and do constructive corrections first so that building won't fall apart. So these are all kinds of questions that arise. Not always what is written in the regulation is what we do. We try to find solutions that are actual. I understand that we don't have time. Just a few data of how much the tax authority had paid in the last years. In the Lebanese war, we had 30,000 damages. We paid $500 million NIS. That was only direct damages. Indirect damages, we paid 3-point-something billion NIS. Oferet Yetzuka, as you see, we had 2,500 damages, 30 million NIS. And Amud Anan, you'll see how interesting. We had almost 4,000 claims, and that was only 9 days. And Operation Protective Edge, we haven't had inserted the data yet. You have to understand the difference between Amud Anan and the Operation Protective Edge. Here we had 4,000 damages in 9 days. If the war had been continued, we would have exceeded the Lebanese war. Here, we had various aspects that influenced the limited damages. We had Kippat Barzel, we had the warfare tactics of the other sides. On the second day of Amud Anan were 400 rockets per day. The climax in Protected Edge was 150 rockets.
אני שמח להיות כאן. האמת שמרגיש לי קצת מוזר להיות בפאנל הזה. אני משפטן בינלאומי.
I feel a little bit weird to be here in this panel. I never spoke with somebody from the tax authority in a panel, but there's something
לא, יש פה משהו אבל שכן מזכיר לי את העיסוק
there's something that reminds me of dealing with Gaza. That's what I do mostly in Gisha, is that when we talk about conduct during warfare, that there during warfare, we have a lot of attention, we give a lot of attention to conduct, and before the war and after the war, when we talk about the conditions of not going to war again, we pay a little bit of attention to things. Less people are in the room at that stage. Maybe that's symbolic. What I want to talk about is about Israel's responsibility towards the population, civilian population in Gaza. I want to mark some concrete steps that should be taken after warfare. We should mention firstly that the civilian population in Gaza is constantly, if not in an extreme situation, then on the verge of such a situation. And in times of warfare, then the case is much more severe. But I don't want only to talk about the damages that happen during war. I want to talk the situation, the routine situation, and the situation that we still have in Gaza. Before I propose some steps that should, and I think, should be taken, I would like to explain why I think that Israel is the one to take such steps. I want to point Israel's responsibilities towards the Gaza residents. And regarding this matter, there are three main schools. One says that Israel has no duties towards Gaza. We're out of there. We don't need to take care about the needs of our enemy. And we've heard that not once. It's not an official approach of the states, although some people from its leadership have not once expressed such an approach. But the official state approach acknowledges the responsibilities towards this population in Gaza. These responsibilities are minimal, and their rationale is that it should be made sure that the population in Gaza shall not drop below a minimal red line. We should take care of their basic needs. We have to ensure the vital minimum of their existence. I would like to present a third approach, and that says that Israel has increased responsibilities towards the civilian population in Gaza. And what it should do is to make sure as much as possible that this population will be able to enjoy regular, normal civilian life. Not to do the vital minimum, but the possible maximum. And the question is, why? Now, the reasons are partly, as I said, I am an international attorney. So I think there are duties here that are beyond international law. I think there are principal duties here involved, and I think that we have a self-interest here to better the situation of the population in Gaza. I will provide some data upon whose basis I claim that we have such duty. First of all, what we should mention is that Gaza and the Western Bank are two factors of one geographic unit, and that is something that Israel had acknowledged. However, the policy that Israel had been promoting since a few years is one whose purpose is to differentiate and separate between these two entities. And this is a named policy. Israel has been controlling these two Palestinian territories via two different models of control. In the Western Bank, it has been controlling via military presence in the field. That's a classic model of occupational model. It's recognized out of Israel and also within Israel. It's widely acknowledged within Israel, I think. Until 2005, the situation was similar in Gaza. There also we had classic occupation, and during this time, since 1967 till 2005, the manner in which Israel had acted within Gaza was one which preserves Gaza's dependence upon Israel. Israel had not generated independent infrastructure in Gaza, not independent economic market in Gaza. It was not necessarily required to do so, but it does have implications on what had happened after 2005, when Israel had withdrawn its forces from Gaza in 2005. It had preserved an overall control over Gaza. Some have mentioned here before the idiom, the sovereign is in the field, how important it is that people would feel that the sovereign is in the field. And in Gaza, the situation is more complex. It's hard to know where exactly is the sovereign. And I will first refer to the control of Israel's control between, among other things, Israel has complete control over Gaza's airfield, over its territorial water. Of course, it controls on the transportations in the border point between Gaza and Israel, and thus it completely controls transportation between Gaza and the western part. Via its control over Gaza's external envelope, it controls the movement of people and merchandise from Gaza and towards it. It controls critical resources, energy resources, and because of this encompassing control that Israel had left within its hands, it has an incredible influence over all the aspects of living in Gaza, or many living fields in Gaza. And Gaza has remained dependent upon Israel. Now, the manner in which Israel had exercised its control and influence over life in Gaza is one of the factors that caused the pretty severe situation that exists in Gaza. In its doings and failures, Israel had, and Israel is not the only factors, but one of the central factors for a situation in Gaza today, the situation of significant shortages in many aspects, which I will detail, some of which later, and this has been done partly by activity during warfare and as an almost natural result of warfare and the great damage that it causes, especially in the last warfare operation. 20,000 housing units were destructed, critical infrastructural entities, but there has also been a great influence through Israel policy on transportation towards Gaza. There's a great water, harsh, severe water situation in Gaza that has brought it to the verge of a humanitarian crisis. There's lack of electricity. Most of the population has access to electricity only a few hours a day, and worse, the shortage of electricity has influenced the ability to provide water to people, to treat sewage properly, and therefore sewage pollutes water and further creates difficulties in Gaza. In Gaza, there is a great shortage of building material, and that has been, of course, increased. And yes, we will refer to the tunnels in a minute, but this has, of course, been increased during to the last operation. I've mentioned how many buildings were destructed, and beyond that, the economics in Gaza works only in one direction. Merchandise, various products can only be shipped into Gaza
עזה גם נהנית
And Gaza is enjoying a humanitarian support of various entities. 70% of the population in Gaza is dependent upon external humanitarian support, but the economy in Gaza has very limited abilities to market its products, very little ability of products to be transferred from Gaza outwards. I should mention, actually, let's go back, actually, I've related to the dire economic state there. Okay, I'll skip a few things. I've mentioned Israel's control over Gaza, and it should be mentioned that Israel is not the only entity that influences life in Gaza. There are other factors that controls other aspects of the living within Gaza. Hamas, of course, controls there and acts in a manner that does not benefit with the population, of course, and some of the current situation is a result of Hamas's conduct. But of course, Israel has a great responsibility there, I've mentioned. The dependence of the Gaza population in Israel, the vast control, the vast influence of the Israel on living conditions in Gaza, and the circumstantial responsibility of Israel to the situation in Gaza. And that leads us to the legal liability of Israel towards the population in Gaza. And the normative place of this liability, at least as far as we see it, is inherent to the humanitarian international law in the framework of occupation laws. Some disagree with this approach, but they all agree that Israel's encompassing control in Gaza does activate other legal frameworks such as civil human rights laws, post-occupational laws. Some people only refer to Israel's responsibility in the framework of its warfare, but there is an overall agreement that Israel is liable towards Gaza. Now, such liability
תכלית היסוד של כל הדינים האלה, של המשפט ההומניטרי הבינלאומי, של דיני זכויות האדם,
is a result,
it's
connected to all these international legal frameworks whose purpose is to promote dignity of man. And I think we should act according to this principle of dignity of man, even beyond the legal, formal legal principles. I think that this is a moral situation that something we are responsible for because of the dignity of man, whoever he is. We are responsible, referring to our responsibility towards people who suffer because of our occupation or controlling powers. Now, I wanted to point towards concrete things that we should do, but the most basic duty is to enable normal civilian life. And that means that we should,
אם נסכם את זה, לתמצת את זה, את
מקסימום
האפשרי, את מקסימום הגישה האפשרית. יש מקום כמובן להגביל תנועה,
Of course, access can be limited based on security considerations, but it should be reduced to this minimum, what is required from security considerations. There are a few limitations, several limitations that Israel has been inflicting upon Gaza that I don't think
קודם כל, יש הגבלה כמעט
stem from
מוחלטת של
these
תנועה של אנשים פנימה והחוצה.
considerations. First of all, there's almost a complete limitation of people from and to Gaza. And that has also severe economic and social implications to Gaza. 30% of Gazan population have relatives in Israel and the Western Bank. Students cannot learn abroad. Merchants cannot import their goods. People cannot look for job opportunities out of Gaza. That is way beyond what is required from security considerations. Secondly, merchandise cannot be exported from Gaza to Israel and the Western Bank, which are the natural markets of Gaza. Before these limitations, 85% of the merchandise of Gaza was exported to Israel and the Western Bank. And this again is something that is not needed due to security considerations, because merchandise can be exported from Gaza to abroad via Israel, via Israel's airport. So for some reason, this is not grasped as a security threat, but exporting merchandise to Israel or to Ramallah is considered a security threat. The limitation of entering building materials, concrete, iron to Gaza. And somebody here mentioned the tunnels. So here we cannot say that there is not a security purpose. There is a security purpose that can justify this policy, but I think that here we should look at this policy in terms of its fairness. Beyond the security purpose, there should be a tool that enables to fulfill such a limitation. The utter limitation of building materials to Gaza will not fulfill the purpose of limiting the building of tunnels. Because Hamas, even with these limitations, which existed before the last warfare, before the last operation, proved that Hamas has no problem of attaining building materials such as that flowed incessantly from Egypt to Gaza, which allowed the building of the tunnels. So these limitations, rather than limiting Hamas's ability, and as a matter of fact, the only buildings being rehabilitated now are Hamas's public buildings. So the vast amount of building materials that the civilian population is in dire need of is not supplied. We should also ask whether this limitation is the less damaging alternative, forbidding the entrance of building materials that such a large population is in dire need of, is not the only step that can be taken in order to prevent the tunnel threat. And we have heard that there are, of course, other methods to prevent this threat, locating the tunnels, destructing the tunnels, and significant effort have been put into this. And in the past, similar claims have been made regarding oils. There was a claim, a correct oil, that in order to fire rockets, one needs oil or fuel, so therefore Gaza should not be allowed to receive any fuel. And of course, this claim was rejected because rockets should be destructed and annihilated, but not by preventing fuel from a whole population for its basic needs. The last aspect of fairness is the damage done versus the benefit. And in this case, there is hardly any benefits to put against the damage, the great damage that this limitation is bringing forth. One last word about the policy, exclusion policy between Gaza and the Western Bank. Lately, we have heard Dan Meridor talking about that. When he was a minister, he asked the Minister of Security, why are we doing this policy? And the security minister had no answer for that. This reality has intentionally separated Gaza and the Western Bank, and it has severe implications on the population in both locations, especially in Gaza, economic-wise and social-wise. And this injured millions of people and has not benefited us. It only increased the hatred towards us, damaged our democracy, and has not benefited us in all. And I am happy to hear that even in our leadership we have heard voices that doubt whether this policy should be continued. A very important question regarding not the day after, but the day before the next operation will, in terms of military strength and rule of law, the steps that we have been taking and the limitations we have been implementing after and before do not promote further warfare. And I would like not political and diplomatic reference to this, but professional and a professional answer to that. בא לך להחליף אותי ושנתחפף? אני אלך? לא? לא, אז אל תחליף אותי אם אני לא אלך. תמשיכי שנייה. אוקיי.
בבית זה גם לא בתחום המומחיות שלי.
אבל ללכת ממש.
So everyone is preoccupied with everything that is international, so I leave it to those factors that are taking care of it. But I would like to use this opportunity and to shed some light on this very complex legal situation, and it has been mentioned here by the head of compensation authority. Well, things are changing in the home front. I think when the enemy is shooting, there is an hour of attack. Our attack is, well, the home front command has a right to instruct the population. There were cases where people were damaged when they didn't comply with very simple instructions. For example, lying on the floor when you're outside. So in such a situation where we do provide instructions and guidance on a constant level during the hour of attack, our attack is relevant since the first shooting for 24 hours. It doesn't matter how many missiles were launched against us. If we started at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 7:50, day afterwards, there is another missile attack. At 8, the hour of attack is over. So our authority ceased to exist in this case. I think it's a very complex situation, very improper situation, because the legal authorities that we do not have any right to instruct the population, and I don't think they intended that it will happen, it will be in the hands of our enemy when we'll have authority and when we will not have an authority. So while we declare an emergency state on the home front, in comparison to the hour of attack, I think this subject is requiring legal consultants. Let's open the stage for a few questions, and afterwards we'll receive the response from the speakers. So the first question is for Tamir. When you refer to the day after, day before, when you're distributing the resources, do you take into account the civil recruitment that exists in order to support the soldiers, to provide them with food, stocks, or whatever it is? If you do you think it should be taken into consideration? And if not, don't you think there is a certain potential waste of resources? And Amir, concerning your remark about the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, I have a question. Don't you think that this is exactly the place and the role of the public servants to say, listen, we do supervise all aspects of combat, and that's why we're looking at the questions of compensation, damages, and etc. That's why we limit the declaration, the authority for a few days. We're not giving you a free pass to do that before we actually know what you're planning, before we have a particular answer. Any additional questions, additional comments, maybe? I wanted to ask you, Eitan, about the connection, not just the public influence, of course, but the very fact that you expose the information, which is a very worthy goal, do you have a direct connection to the decision makers? And if you do, whether there is a real influence on different factors in the government and the military? I'm actually interested whether following the protective edge you implemented steps that you can mention that actually policy oriented based on intention to influence, or such an organization like yours has no power or desire to actually influence in Israel on the decision-making process. Well, my question to Eitan is a very brief one. I listened to what you said attentively, and I try to give myself an answer. How do you manage to bridge the gap between those very interesting international suggestions and the reality in the field? I have this feeling that you're actually trying to impose on us, and it's something very Jewish that's taking the guilt upon ourselves, that we are guilty necessarily. But I'm asking you, the other party, is that they're not Swiss, you know. This is the terror organization that is about to harm us. Don't you think that in such a situation we need to comply our response with the reality?
I'm sorry about the technology. We will be improved.
Is it okay to ask in English? Sure. My question arises from a fact-finding mission I was involved in from the Lebanon War. From evidence of officials in northern Israel, there was more of a problem in relation to Israeli Arabs than Israelis who weren't Arab, partly because they had less opportunity to drive to the south, also because they were less likely, and it's this bit that interests me, to have underground shelters. I assume your building regulations are the same for everyone. First, is this your experience that they are less likely to have underground shelters? If that is the case, is it because you're not enforcing the building regulations? What's the explanation?
Any other questions? הערות? אוקיי, אז אנחנו נתחיל מהסוף להתחלה, איתן. אוקיי? אוקיי.
אנחנו מתנצלים כי אנחנו צריכים להמשיך לפעילות נוספת. נענה לשאלה לגבי ועדת חוץ וביטחון. קודם כל, מבחינת התפקיד והאחריות, ודיברה על זה מירי שור פרנקל, יש כמובן 12 ועדות בכנסת, לכל אחת ואחת מהן תפקיד חשוב, והתפקיד מבחינת הרשות המחוקקת, האחראי על בין בקרה ובין ביצוע של חלוקת המשאבים הכלכליים של המדינה נתון לוועדת הכספים, לא לוועדת חוץ וביטחון, שעדה במקומה מונח. התפקיד של הביצוע או של הקב"ט, זה הקווים המנחים, התפקיד של הביצוע של המטלות או של חלוקת המשאבים בפועל, זה נתון הרשות המבצעת למשרד האוצר לשר האוצר. גם הנקודה הזאת עלתה גם בפסיקה בבית המשפט העליון בבג"ץ ענייני חוקה, שדיברו האם יש סמכות או האם אין אפליה בכך שיש קו גבול מסוים גיאוגרפי. היה בג"ץ ענייני חוקה, נגיד, זה סוגיה אחת, יש פארק בריכות שנמצא באזור עמק בית שאן, והוא מבחינת הקו הגיאוגרפי של הפיצוי במלחמת העולם השנייה, היה עומד לקו שבו ניתן הפיצוי. והוא בעצם אנחנו ביולי-אוגוסט, שזה עיקר תקופת התיירות והפעילות שלנו, בעיקר אנחנו נבדוק בצורה משמעותית במלחמת העולם השנייה, ואנחנו רוצים לפיצוי מכיוון שתחנתם לקו הגבול מצפון אלינו. ובא בית המשפט העליון ואמר בעצם רשאית המדינה משיקולים כאלה ואחרים בין השאר משיקולים תקציביים לבוא לגזור קו בין הוא קו גבול גיאוגרפי שעובר מצפון לפיקדור לבין הוא קו גבול כלכלי שבו תחם את הפיצוי וגם אדם נוספה שתוחמת פיצוי X minus Y שווה Z,
providing certain compensation in certain areas. There was a formula, of course, but maybe someone has been damaged above the definitions of this equation. And we, in this war, we had to put it into the compensation fund. And the Supreme Court expressed its opinion very clearly, so this involvement of the Committee of Foreign Affairs and Defense has a lot of influence. The provision of damages is connected to geographical areas, obviously. But as Tamir said, we talk about the military activities and the need to provide guidance, for example, to the home front that provided the military with the possibility of actually dealing with the situation, and to connect that to the damages, well, this is really unrelated to my opinion. I think that they're trying to force in order to, kind of just like twins. If you hitting one child and then another child will hit their brother, his sibling. But there's no any connection between the Treasury Department and the Ministry of Defense that have to manage the war now. The Ministry of Treasury has to fund a certain amount of damages, but the Ministry of Defense cannot comply with a situation where it's not free to operate. While there's a macro level of our ability to cope with such a situation. If we would have operated correctly, maybe we could have limited time frame of the activity, what would be the resource scope that we can allocate for such a effort. And based on that, then we derive the compensation. What we are currently dragged into is a certain particular definition of the zone of 40 kilometers. Maybe we would have acted smarter if we were forced to do that by the Committee of Defense and Foreign Affairs. Concerning the question. The compensation. אתם יודעים שמערכת הגברה לא עובדת.
בעניין של חומסין, ואני חושב שבנימין אחרי זה תשלים את התמונה.
Benjamin will complete this picture, of course, afterwards.
אני כבר אתן לו את הרשות הדיבור. בכל אופן, אני אתן את זה כרגע לכולם. בעניין של הפיצויים היה גם במלחמת לבנון השנייה עניין לבג"ץ היה סוג של אפליה לא מכוונת
that was not intentional between 7 different settlements, Arabic settlements on the border of Lebanon and between other settlements in the same area. Theoretically, allegedly, historically, when the state legislated property tax law, the state of Israel, I don't have it in presentation, I think their perception was
תקנות הקהילה היהודית בימי הביניים ועוד בתקופת הפרעות טרום הקמת המדינה וזה שהיישוב היהודי צריך להגן על עצמו באמצעים קהילתיים שמגינה על עצמו עשו רשימה של יישובי ספר שקוראים בעלולים לסגור
adjacent to the board and might suffer attacks from them enemy. And therefore the list of those settlements is a historical list of historical Jewish settlements after the Lebanese War, the Second Lebanese war, when we faced the indirect damage, in addition to all the peripheral settlements that are Jewish, 9 kilometers from the border, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, that included, of course, the Arabic settlements as well. And now during the protected H operation, we also included different Arabic settlements, of course. All the settlements that are geographically situated adjacent to the line that has been defined as a line of damages. And I think that that was a quite correct step to do, of course.
תודה. על השאלה של פרנסין יענה סרן עורך דין בנימין שנדל, שהוא היועץ המשפטי לפיקוד העורף, אני אתייחס לנושא אליי דור. תראו, קודם כל יש כללים במדינה.
First of all, there are certain rules in the country. I'm sorry, there are certain subjects that are defined as a contribution, as a volunteer contribution. There are certain decisions that the government has to make at the principal level without actually prolonging that too much. Everything that's related to missions of the army,
כלי נשק, שזה דבר ברור, כל
artillery,
לא ניתן לקבל.
arms, of course, you cannot receive contribution, obviously.
מעבר לזה, יש כללים לקבל תרומה.
In addition, there are certain rules. The soldier is not allowed to receive a present. They're very clear. A public service law guidelines, and army is included. Any present is supposed to go through a committee.
העניין הוא לא כל כך פשוט במובן הזה, ואנחנו שומרים על החוק גם בעת לחימה. עכשיו, זה לא סתם, יש לזה רציונל. אנחנו נותנים את זה גם בסיפור אישי. הרציונל גם לשמור על שוויון בתוך הצבא. לא יכול להיות שלמשל, חטיבה אחת יותר אהודה בקרב הציבור, יותר דברים מאשר חטיבה אחרת שנמצאת במקום אולי שהציבור מרגיש עליו. מעבר לזה, יש פה אלמנט ביטחוני מאוד.
When the citizens are contributing, this is very dangerous. People that went to the military backstairs did not obey to the regulations. Army is not supposed to. It's supposed to concentrate on the combat and not supposed to try to accommodate the needs of the citizens. It's very time-consuming and it drags the attention of the army to the wrong places. In addition, there is of course additional aspects here. In the end, the army and the military they have a line of values and beliefs, a bit of a religious aspect as well. So, for example, it's mandatory that the army will provide a kosher food. For that matter, one is not allowed to. To provoke, but we cannot respect those who are not using consuming not kosher food. We have an obligation of providing kosher food. This is my personal anecdote. During the Gulf War, I was in the army, and our mission was they stopped the course, and we had to guard the Patriot missiles. So it arrived together with the Americans that serve there, and we came in order to provide support. Well, naturally, we had all the instructions, and Israeli soldiers, Americans couldn't really start to operate here independently in the sovereign territory of the state of Israel on the Hulon Junction, there were Marine soldiers, and there were all cadets from the course.
זו הייתה עת שבהם כל האזרחים הזדרזו מאוד להגיע ממקום למקום והשתדלו להיות כמה שפחות בחוץ. והחוויה שלי הייתה שבמשמרות שלי, אני זוכר שאמרתי בשמירה, מכונית נעצרת בחריקה, זורקת לנו דברים, אמרו תנו לחיילים האמריקאים. משהו שאתה אומר לעצמך, האם זה נכון ככה להסתמך על זה טבע, דברים בצבא לא יכולים להסתמך על זה. ואנחנו בוודאי שמחים שהמדינה, וזה מתכתב עם מה שאמרתי בהרצאה, המדינה ואזרחיה נרתמים למען הצרכים של הצבא והצבא לא לספק בחיילים של והדרך הנכונה להתמודד בזמן ולא בעת חירום בצורה לא
in this chaotic manner. I'm not saying that this is improper act, but it just points out that there's certain difficulties that they were incapable of really comply with during the military activity.
Regarding the question about the bomb shelters in the Arab-Israeli population, just one general remark. According to the Civil Defense Act, which is the Israeli legal infrastructure by which the Home Front Command fulfills its duty, as far as bomb shelters goes, the main provision is that according to this law, every request for a building permit in Israel requires the person requesting to do a construction project or build a new home or make an addition to their home they must prove that or they have a bomb shelter, or that their construction will include the construction of a bomb shelter, or its enlargement. Naturally, this provision requires that there must be some sort of active supervision on the building in that given area. That supervision is usually the municipal level, which means if someone requests a building permit, the municipality must send that building permit to the Homefront Command, and then we also have obviously very skilled engineers who check these building permits, and they verify the building permit includes a bomb shelter or its construction or its renovation or whatever is required, and then the municipality has the authority to allow the building permit to be constructed. Now, naturally, where there's no supervision, which was also very common in the early years of Israel, about until 71, all the supervision of building Israel was not very active, which means that most of the buildings that were built until 1971 do not have bomb shelters, even though it was required by the Homefront Command's legal infrastructure and also other provisions. Afterwards, when the legal infrastructure for properly supervising building was enacted, they started building bomb shelters. Those are the ones that usually underneath multi-story apartment buildings. With the years, the relationship between the Homefront Command and the municipalities has become much better. Right now, I think almost every building being built, with a permit, of course, includes a bomb shelter, which are now also part of the apartments themselves. As far as the Israeli Arab population goes, where there are areas where there's not currently sufficient supervision in the building, the result is that they also do not build bomb shelters. So maybe voluntarily they do, but because of the cost, it's very probable that some people do not build them out of their own goodwill. Just on the remark, I don't know the statistics personally about between the Israeli population and the different segments of it, but as a result of or not insufficient supervision now or in the past, about a third of the Israeli population does not have bomb shelters. It might be a little bit, depending on which area, it could be higher or lower, but the lack of shelters is something that inflicts all of Israel, not just certain segments of it. I hope that answers your question.
אני מבין שאני מפריד בין כולם.
So now that I'm actually separating between you and the end of this very long day, so I would like to do this very quickly, but first of all I would like to refer to the question that Ali brought up here. I think that in addition there are certain interests that we have concerning our relationship with the civil population and all those values that we represent, this particular behavior that we're referring when we're talking about distress and lack of conditions, stability and peace. There's also a problem, a very harsh problem, that we're actually failing in something that we also try to critique all the time at our enemy's behavior, while we fail to distinguish between the enemy and the population. And while in addition, I think all of those values are threatening us directly. I was referring to, I talked about the water distress in Gaza, the deficit of water, the very fact that on the actual threshold of humanitarian catastrophe, there is also a gap of 26% of diseases are related to the quality of the low quality of water provided to Gaza citizens among children. The percentage is horrific. I'm taking that from the research that it was not, it's INSS's research, and they had a very comprehensive research of the quality of water and consumption of water in Gaza, among other topics. They researched the problem in Gaza, threatening us as well, the diseases that exist in Gaza might threaten Israel directly. Well, concerning the question of the dialogue that exists between authorities and the possibility of influencing the authorities, for many years there was a dialogue, a direct dialogue between the authorities and while you work in a civil sector in Israel. Of course, dialogue changes. The international law is a tool that we use, especially while working in our public sphere. It's an indirect dialogue with the authorities through the public, talking to the representatives of authorities on forums such as this. For example, the legal language that we speak is an internal language. For us, this is a fight to implement those regulations in Israel. There's a matters of principle that unfortunately can be heard only by certain sectors of our public. And concerning the question of the liability of the other party, well, I mentioned, of course, that Hamas has responsibility, liability, tremendous liability. But my ratio is actually focused on our liabilities and our obligations as Israel. I'm an Israeli citizen and I care for Israel, and it's important for me that authorities represent my country and people that are working in our name, that are operating in our name, will work in a proper manner. And, well, of course, the claim that each party is responsible in its own sovereign domain, well, what I actually try to present is how Israeli control of the external borders of Gaza brings us to this particular situation in which Israel is actually dictates to a very large extent the conditions of life in Gaza. And again, I would like to repeat the sovereign is in the field, so in Gaza, and those who are in the field and control the field cannot really fulfill all the sovereign functions. They cannot do that because they don't have in the global era that we live in, when there is a mutual connection between countries and movement. This is a very central part of being a sovereign country, of the significance of sovereignty. And in this case, this part of sovereignty is not in the hands of those who control the field in Gaza. This is in the hands of Israel. I have a very dispersed model of sovereignty that exists in Gaza, and this is also something that complicates tremendously the division of responsibility and liability. Israel is not responsible for everything, and Hamas is not absolved, of course, of responsibility in any manner. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you all. It was a very interesting panel. I would like to invite Professor Gadi Barzilai to say a few words of summary, brief words of summary in the end of this very long day. I'll be very brief. So I took upon myself a mission that is almost impossible. It's a bit of a pretentious mission, and it's to sum up in 2 minutes, 24 speakers. So I will not do that, of course, but what I would like to do, I think there's a certain narrative that I would like to refer to, and this narrative starts from the last lecture, Eitan's lecture, because this operation was an asymmetric war. That is not a war between two states. This is a war between a state and a population with a social and guerrilla organization that is ruling over this population, which is also a question whether it's a terroristic or guerrilla organization, but it's an asymmetrical war. And in an asymmetrical war, there are dilemmas that were expressed today very clearly by the speakers. The first panel, I think that the main question, the main dilemma that surfaced up was to what extent the military strength and force was proportional. Was it proportional or not? To my understanding, the International Committee will also spend a lot of time analyzing this matter. And I think that as for today, the refuse of the government of Israel to participate, to cooperate with the committee is not necessarily a smart move. Because any attorney knows that even you have a judge doesn't believe in him, it's better to represent your client than to waive the right to speak in court, the report will be very, very critical. I think it will be much more critical if Israel will not cooperate, and I think it's quite a shame because we heard that the legal entities in the army invested a lot of effort in order to validate those military activities and to use them legal backup. And it's quite a shame that those matters will not be expressed in cooperation with the committee, which I think the chairman of the committee should resign. I do not think that it's possible that the person who is in charge of the international committee will receive this role after he already decided who is guilty and who is not. But I think at any account, even the existing content of committee, Israel should cooperate with this committee. And I think that was a panel that was very important because it actually shed light on various dilemmas that the international law dealt with in this situation. The protective edge discussed from the perspective of civil society in Israel during the second panel, and we spoke about the freedom of speech. In wars in general, the scope of civil society is limited. It's always limited. It happened in the Western democracies as well in the United States during the Vietnam War and Korea War, and it happened in Britain and it happened in any modern Western society, and it happened during the protective edge operation as well. Whether it was less or more in comparison to other regimes, it's really hard to say that now, but we showed during this panel that there was a police activity at the level that lack of provision of permits, and there were demonstrations that received permits, but also were very volatile demonstrations. But there were demonstrations that were prevented. We talked about the virtual freedom of speech, virtual and not online freedom of speech. But I think that the main conclusion of this panel was quite complex. First of all, the discovery of lack of patience that was very severe to the protest against the war. While this was the main source of the lack of tolerance were not necessarily the government, but actually groups, different public groups and organizations. And the second conclusion was, of course, that the legal system, the legal entities in Israel, not necessarily provided enough space to with the concerns of those who protested the war and opposed the war. The third panel, I think, was dialectically related to the panel that referred to international law groups, what we actually saw during the supervision panel. That not necessarily have solutions, that institutionalized solutions for supervision of how exactly the army auditing itself. What is the civil control over the army? And I think the majority of the speakers spoke about the structures and institutions. I think the main problem is a cultural problem. The presence of Israeli army in Israeli culture is so significant that it's almost impossible to develop a civil criticism of the army in a way that will actually bring the army to learn lessons. I do not think that the problem is an institutional problem. I think that the problem is mostly a cultural problem, but it can involve the culture, that there are also limitations within the structures that exist for such a purpose, and the restrictions in the Israeli society. How can we actually research asymmetric war? And of course, it will definitely bring a certain criticism on the level of international law against the state of Israel following events in the war, a few events that were very problematic from different aspects during the protective age operation. And the last panel dedicated to, I think it had actually two different paths and different itineraries. The first itinerary showed us that within the army as well, and outside the army, there's certain mechanisms, quite efficient mechanisms that implement an existing legislation in everything that is related to rehabilitation and reconstruction. I think that an institutional structure has different flaws, but the system actually works on the level of MHAs and work with the military from the other aspect. There are flaws within the Israeli society, including the fact that we are, to a certain extent, as we actually saw during the panel about the freedom of speech, we do not we refuse to open our eyes. We do not see the suffering and pain that's been inflicted on the other party. Well, we usually say, this is war and that's what happens, and that's our response. It was response, I think, was a final action. It was the right thing because it closes up the narrative, the general narrative of this day. But I would like to add something about the liability, civil liability of Israel, not just towards its own citizens, but towards the residents of Gaza, whether there is a legal liability, an obligation of Israel to take care of citizens in Gaza. This is a very interesting question, of course. Because on one hand, one can say this is not occupied territory. On the other hand, it's quite clear that Israel controls and rules over a significant aspect of other existence. And I think that Israel has a legal liability to provide solutions for Gaza residents. What is the scope of such an obligation is actually an ethical question, and here there are certain broken lines between the legal liability and the ethical liability that we carry on our shoulders. Well, that's a bit of a punchline, I must say that I think that it's great that we have a question whether it was a protective edge. I think they are dilemmas, whether that was a protection. Well, those dilemmas are dilemmas that should bother us tremendously, because it doesn't matter what will happen on the Iran and Israel front or Syria and Israel front, but I think the future, I think we will deal again and again and again with other asymmetrical wars, and regardless, Israel will be exposed as well to missile attacks, and that's a very problematic formula, because from one hand, your home front is exposed to missiles, from the other hand, you, with their very advanced air forces that really used very few abilities it has during the last war, they can implement much more force. And then the question is, based on what parameter we limit the force implemented, and what will be the ramifications of more force implemented in future asymmetric wars in the region? How will be the proportionality examined, and the proportionality test in international law are very, very problematic, because it's unclear to the level of what kind of damage the proportion should be measured against. So this question will be definitely discussed within the frames of Israeli law and international law as well. I would like to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Ido and Michal and Minerva Group, and the young generation, Michal, Isua and Yariv, that worked so hard, and of course my colleagues, Eli, Amnon, Debbie, that is here with us in New York. And thank you all of you for coming here. And in the name of Minerva Center and the Faculty of Law of Haifa University, I would like to thank you, and I hope it was interesting and fruitful.